As Chen Pingyan carried the water buckets toward Iron Lock Well, he passed by a few early opening shops in Apricot Blossom Alley. His stomach, silent moments ago, now growled with hunger. Unfortunately, his pockets were embarrassingly light. So, he steeled himself and waited in line for his turn at the well. 3 households were ahead of him when Tri-Q, carrying a small wooden bucket, suddenly cut in line in front of him. The people behind were immediately displeased. No one outright cursed at her, but the murmurs were sharp. Among them, Madame Ma, a notorious old woman with 2 highly accomplished sons, each owning a small kiln at Long Kiln, was the most vocal. Even though her sons ranked at the bottom of the 30-some kilns, she still held herself high in Apricot Blossom Alley. For some reason, she had a terrible relationship with both of her daughters-in-law, and after they moved to Peach Leaf Alley, she was left alone in the old house. To Chen Pingyan and Lu Xianyang's generation, Madame Ma was terrifying. She was the type who would chase children across multiple streets with a broom if they dared throw snowballs at her doorstep or pluck icicles from her eaves. In the past, the only person who could stand up to her was Ko San's mother. But now that the widow had left to seek refuge with her late husband's relatives, Madame Ma had fully returned to her old self, reigning over the alley with unchecked arrogance. Now, spotting Tri-Q, Madame Ma couldn't resist throwing shade. She didn't speak loudly, but her tone was dripping with mockery and malice, addressing another woman next to her. Some girls are lucky, aren't they? Finally, their time comes when they can spread their legs without shame. No more playing the role of a lady trapped in a servant's fate, they can now openly be called Madam. The implication was obvious, and Chen Pingyan's scalp tingled. But how could he just send Tri-Q away? They had been neighbors for years. He quickly filled Lu Xianyang's 2 water buckets and then picked up Tri-Q's bucket as well, hoping to escape before the gossiping women could escalate the situation. Seeing that the hussy from Muddy Alley was ignoring her, Madame Ma grew even angrier. Fighting an opponent who doesn't even acknowledge your existence, what a disgrace. Back when she used to bicker with the widow, she lost every time. But at least she felt like she was improving, as if next time, she might win. But this Neben Alley maid? She never engaged. Yet, whenever Tri-Q left, she always threw one last glance at Madame Ma, a look that somehow drove the old woman mad. She hated it to the core. If it weren't for the fact that every young man in the surrounding alleys had eyes glued to that waist of hers, she would have scratched the girl's face raw long ago. And worst of all, her own grandson, despite being known as a fool, had recently lost his mind completely. He kept muttering that one day, he'd marry this woman and punch a hole through the sky for her. Since Tri-Q wouldn't respond, Madame Ma turned her venom toward Chen Pingyan. She clicked her tongue and sneered. A good-for-nothing orphan boy. Can't even take care of himself, and yet he's got the nerve to chase after another family's maid. What a fine match, one filthy stray from Muddy Alley and another shameless girl. Might as well get together and start breeding more street rats. Who knows? Maybe their brats will grow up to rule Muddy Alley. Hearing this, Chen Pingyan slowly set down his carrying pole. But before he could act, Tri-Q had already moved. She dropped her bucket, took one swift step forward, and slapped Madame Ma across the face. The old woman spun in place, dizzy and stunned, and had to be held upright by the women beside her. Before she could even recover, Tri-Q took another step forward and slapped her again, harder this time. You damn old hag, I've put up with you for too long, she snapped. The old woman's head wobbled, and rage exploded within her. She tried to retaliate, but for some reason, the 2 women holding her refused to let go, gripping her too tightly as if by accident. And so, she suffered a third humiliation. This time, Tri-Q curled her fingers and knocked hard on the old woman's forehead. If you ever curse at me again, I'll rip your tongue out. Every word you spit, I'll stab you with a needle. For the first time, Madame Ma was speechless. She didn't even think to curse back, let alone fight. Tri-Q turned and left, only to see that Chen Pingyan had already picked up her bucket for her. She smiled and walked beside him back toward Muddy Alley. Before Chen Pingyan could say a word, she quickly cut him off. "Don't thank me. I hit her for myself, not for you." Chen Pingyan sighed. She left her bucket in his hands and walked freely, as if she had no intention of carrying it herself. Thunder from the heavens. By the time they passed the early market shops, Chen Pingyan spotted a familiar figure. A petite girl dressed in a soft blue robe was buying freshly steamed meat buns. The steam curled in the air, filling the street with a rich aroma. At that moment, a deep rumble of thunder shook the town. Madame Ma, still sitting by the well, jumped up in terror. She scrambled away, clutching her bucket. Water sloshed out as she ran home, and by the time she arrived, she probably had less than half a bucket left. Maybe deep down, she knew, if the heavens were truly just, the first bolt of lightning would strike her first. Chen Pingyan glanced at the sky, puzzled. The clouds were thick, but there were no signs of rain. Tri-Q giggled and said, "My young master once read about this in a book. Apparently, at the beginning of every spring, the celestial court's golden-armored gods beat their war drums to drive away evil and welcome the new season." Chen Pingyan nodded. "Your young master reads a lot." She sighed. "Yes, but he's lazy. And worse, he likes to curse the heavens. I think that's not very good." Chen Pingyan didn't comment. He had never been the type to gossip about others behind their backs. Song Juten, on the other hand, cursed the heavens daily, just like Madame Ma. But he had a method. He only cursed when he thought the heavens were asleep, so they wouldn't hear him and get angry. It was a strange logic, but Chen Pingyan had to admit, it was a very Song Juten kind of reasoning. And so, in the midst of spring thunder, a poor orphan boy and a cunning maid walked home, each with their own thoughts. Chen Pingyan carried the buckets of water back to Lu Xianyang's courtyard, pouring them into the kitchen's water vat. Then, he rushed to the door and called out, "Lu Xianyang, I'm going to use some of your firewood, oil, and salt to make fish soup for Ninggunyang. She needs something nourishing. Is that all right?" Lu Xianyang, who had been comfortably sleeping in, was rudely awakened. Enraged, he shouted, "Chen Pingyan! Do you ever stop? I just dreamed of Tri-Q smiling at me. Now you owe me a Tri-Q." Chen Pingyan shook his head, suddenly remembering something. "Oh, right. I actually ran into Tri-Q just now at Iron Lock Well, but Madame Ma interrupted, and I forgot to pass along your message. I promise, when I bring the fish soup to Ninggunyang later, I'll be sure to deliver it for you." Hearing this, Lu Xianyang instantly flipped over, dressed in record time, and ran to sit outside the main hall's threshold, grinning mischievously as he watched Chen Pingyan busily preparing food in the kitchen. "I'll go with you to deliver the fish soup. By the way, was Tri-Q wearing that bright red pomegranate dress today? Or the light green one? Ugh, I swear, once I save up another 200 copper coins, I'm buying her that silver-plated dragon powder box she's been eyeing forever. But of course, that miser Song Jiatuan would never buy it for her. He's so stingy he dresses like some random beggar from Blessed Prosperity Street, while poor Tri-Q barely gets a few new dresses a year. If I were her young master, I'd buy her whatever she wanted. She'd be richer than any noble lady from Blessed Prosperity Street." Chen Pingyan ignored Lu Xianyang's wild daydreaming. He honestly couldn't understand why Lu Xianyang was so fixated on Tri-Q. It wasn't that he looked down on her for being a servant, nor that he thought she wasn't pretty, he just felt that she and Lu Xianyang didn't seem destined for each other. Curious, Chen Pingyan asked, "Why do you always call her Tri-Q instead of Wang Chu?" Lu Xianyang smirked. "So you don't even know how to write Tri-Q? Well, now I feel better." Chen Pingyan sighed. "Why compare yourself to me? If you're so proud, compare yourself to Song Jiatuan. After all, Tri-Q isn't my servant." Lu Xianyang scoffed. That guy isn't better than me at everything. For example, has he ever called anyone father or mother in his life? No, right? That means he's worse off than you, Chen Ping'an. That's why all those bitter old ladies, like Ko San's mother and Madame Ma, love to gossip about him. They don't see him as part of any decent family. Otherwise, why would he live like a beggar in Muddy Alley instead of moving into the grand residence of the overseer of kills? He deserves to be sneered at and called a bastard child. Chen Ping'an walked to the kitchen door, frowning. Lu Xianyang, I may not be friends with Song Jiatuan, but even so, what you're saying about him. Lu Xianyang immediately raised his hands in surrender, stopping Chen Ping'an from lecturing him. Alright, I won't say another word. Geez, you and your stubborn, do-gooder attitude, who do you get that from? My grandfather always said your parents were easygoing, especially your mother. She spoke softly, always smiling, and was just, incredibly kind. Even Madame Ma, that foul-mouthed old crone, never had a bad word to say about her. At this, Chen Ping'an couldn't stop smiling. Lu Xianyang waved him off. Alright, go make your fish soup for your little wife. Chen Ping'an rolled his eyes. If you're so bold, why don't you say that in front of Ninggunyang? Lu Xianyang grinned. I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid. A short while later, Chen Ping'an carried a small ceramic pot of fish soup. The two boys locked the doors behind them and headed toward Muddy Alley. When they reached Chen Ping'an's house, he realized he didn't have the key, he had left it with Ninggunyang. So he just stood there, knocking awkwardly. Lu Xianyang stared at him in disbelief. You actually gave her the key to your whole house? Chen Ping'an, there's no saving you. When Ningju answered the door, she wasn't wearing her veil, revealing her sharp yet refreshing features. For some reason, Lu Xianyang felt uneasy around her, something he couldn't explain. She wasn't necessarily colder than Tri-Q, but she had an aura that made him instinctively cautious. When Ningju opened the ceramic pot, she took a whiff, narrowed her sharp eyes slightly, and nodded. In a rare show of gentleness, she thanked him softly, thank you. Chen Ping'an knew this meant she was in a good mood. After setting a pot of congee on the stove for her, he reminded her to watch the fire, then turned to Lu Xianyang. Are you going to wait here for Tri-Q? I need to deliver a message. Lu Xianyang was already leaning against the doorframe, listening closely, trying to catch any sounds of a possible fight nearby. Annoyed, he waved Chen Ping'an away. Go do your thing. Chen Ping'an hurried off, but just as he was about to reach the main intersection, a shadow loomed over him. Looking up, he saw a tall man clad in a pure white cloak, standing with one hand resting on his belt and the other behind his back. Sensing that he was blocking the narrow alleyway, the man smiled faintly and stepped aside, allowing Chen Ping'an to pass. Even as he ran ahead, Chen Ping'an glanced back. The man was walking into Muddy Alley. The quick glimpse revealed that his cloak bore golden embroidery, forming two swirling cloud-like patterns that seemed to move like living creatures within the misty threads. Chen Ping'an assumed he was another outsider, someone like Fu Nanhua, here to seek fortune. But unlike before, after meeting Tai Tian Xin under the old locust tree, he wasn't as afraid anymore. After all, as long as Tai Tian Xin was here, nothing could go too terribly wrong. A town on the brink. In Peach Leaf Alley, an elderly man stood outside his grand home, watching the falling peach leaves. Beside him, a young maidservant whispered, Old master, what are you looking at? It's cold outside, you shouldn't stay here too long. The old man smiled, I'm watching a child walk away. The girl giggled, a girl, right? Standing under the peach tree. The old man sighed, turning to her. Peach Sprout, you're an observant one. She beamed, proud of the compliment. Then, the old man said something that made her freeze. In 2 days, some distant relatives will visit. When they arrive, you and the other young ones will leave this town, and never return. Her eyes instantly reddened. Old master. I don't want to leave. The kind old man, for the first time, refused to argue. Go inside, Peach Sprout. If you disobey, I will be angry. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the ancient town. For 3,000 years, it had been favored by fate, but all debts must be repaid. And this time, no one would escape unscathed. Once again, Chen Pingyan saw the girl in the green robe. She was quietly following behind a middle-aged man, her head lowered as she took bites from a scallion pancake. The man's expression was one of utter despair, as if life held no joy for him. Upon spotting Chen Pingyan, the man halted in his steps and asked, "Are you that brat I kicked out last time?" Before Chen Pingyan could respond, the girl suddenly stiffened and bumped into the man's back. She turned, caught sight of Chen Pingyan, and just as she was about to smile, she abruptly spun around and frantically wiped her mouth. Chen Pingyan held back his laughter, instead giving the man a polite nod. "Master Nguyen, good day." Judging from their interaction, this girl was most likely Master Nguyen's daughter. Thankfully, they looked nothing alike. Master Nguyen, the new blacksmith who had set up shop near the southern stream, frowned and continued. "Why hasn't Lu Xianyang shown up at the forge these past 2 days?" Before Chen Pingyan could explain, the blacksmith coldly cut him off. "Tell that brat that if I don't see him today, he doesn't need to come back at all." Chen Pingyan quickly said, "Master Nguyen, something urgent came up at his house." The man snorted, cutting him off again. "That's his problem, not mine." Chen Pingyan froze, his face turning red from frustration. Master Nguyen was as stubborn as iron, and Chen Pingyan had already learned firsthand how difficult he was. Seeing this, the girl in the green robe attempted to speak up for Chen Pingyan, but before she could say anything, her father barked at her. "Eat your pancake." Infuriated, the girl stomped on his foot with all her strength before dashing away like the wind. Master Nguyen sighed heavily, nudged Chen Pingyan aside, and resumed walking. Chen Pingyan could only sigh as well. Back in Muddy Alley. After picking up 6 steaming meat buns, Chen Pingyan hurried home. When he arrived, he was greeted by the bizarre sight of Lu Xianyang squatting on top of the courtyard wall, half of his body dangling over Song Jiatuan's yard, eavesdropping with intense focus. Sometimes, even Chen Pingyan had to admit, Lu Xianyang was utterly hopeless. Sighing, he reminded him, "I ran into Master Nguyen. He said you need to be at the forge today, or you'll be fired." Lu Xianyang, still focused on his spying, muttered absent-mindedly, "As if he'd really fire me. Good apprentices like me are hard to find. He's just bluffing. I'll go tomorrow." Chen Pingyan shook his head. "I'm certain he's not joking." Lu Xianyang groaned. Fine, I'll go. Just let me finish this first." Ignoring him, Chen Pingyan delivered breakfast to Ningjiu, handing 3 buns to Lu Xianyang while keeping only 1 for himself. Lu Xianyang devoured them in 3 bites, wiped his mouth, and whispered excitedly. "Just now, Song Jiatuan had an important guest. If I'm not mistaken, it's the new overseer of kills. Remember last time he visited the dragon kills in full court regalia? Old Jiu wouldn't let you apprentices anywhere near him, but he had me perform a blade dance for him." Chen Pingyan chuckled. Everyone in town already knows the new overseer favors Song Jiatuan. What's the point of all this sneaking around? Lu Xianyang grew anxious. "That's not the issue. I don't care about Song Jiatuan. But what if Tri Q falls for this distinguished court official instead? Then I'll have no chance. What if your future sister-in-law runs off with someone else? What will you do? What will I do?" Chen Pingyan wordlessly turned back into his house, leaving Lu Xianyang to stew in his own worries atop the wall. A shadow looms over Muddy Alley. Inside, Ningjiu sat bolt upright at the table, one hand gripping her sword hilt. Sweat trickled down her forehead. For the first time, Chen Pingyan saw her like this, her body tense, eyes gleaming with anticipation, like a predator on the verge of striking. He backed away to the doorway and asked, "You know who's next door?" She nodded, her smile cold. "The new overseer of kills. People like him are the most terrifying." Chen Pingyan frowned. "Why?" she asked. "When you walk down the road, do you step on ants?" Chen Pingyan thought about it. Ko-san definitely does. He likes pouring water into anthills or blocking their exits with stones. Lu Xianyang might too, if he's in a bad mood. Ning Ju was speechless. Chen Pingyan grinned. "But I understand what you mean." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh. Explain." Chen Pingyan nodded. "You're saying there are two meanings. First, to outsiders like you, everyone in this town is just an ant beneath their feet. Second, even among outsiders, there's a hierarchy. Fu Nanhua and Tai Kim John are like Ko-san, they toy with the ants because they find it amusing. But the overseer of kills is different. He treats us with courtesy, because that suits his status." Ning Ju studied him. "How did you figure that out?" Chen Pingyan smirked. "Ever since I survived nearly dying, I've been thinking more clearly." Ning Ju's expression turned serious. "Before you nearly died, what did you see?" "Nothing," he said honestly. "I wasn't thinking about anything back then. Maybe you should ask Fu Nanhua or Tai Kim John, they might have seen something." She scoffed. "Ha! Listen to you, acting all high and mighty." For some reason, her sharp gaze locked onto him. Chen Pingyan felt uneasy. "What?" She furrowed her brows, deep in thought, muttering in her native tongue. "Our sword techniques, the breathing methods, the meditation forms, they're all our clan's secret arts. I haven't even fully learned them myself, so how could I teach someone else? Besides, I've never studied the martial arts of other sections. Otherwise, I could at least show him something, even if it's just to strengthen his body or prolong his life. But where can I find a low-level sword manual now?" Suddenly, her eyes lit up. "Rob someone?" She immediately shook her head. "No, not rob, borrow." "Yes. I'll borrow one. Fair and square." But her face quickly fell. She gritted her teeth. "Damn that eunuch. Just you wait. I'll flip your entire palace upside down." She looked devastated, muttering, "So my only option is to beg that old swordsmith Nguyen Chu. I can kill people just fine, but begging. I'm really bad at that." From the doorway, Chen Pingyan watched her facial expressions shift wildly, like storm clouds rolling across the sky. A confrontation in muddy alley. In Song Jiatuan's room, the handsome man in white robes and a jade belt stood, surveying the modest surroundings with a frown. "Is this the kind of place Song Jiatuan arranged for you?" Song Jiatuan remained silent. The man scoffed, turning away. "Listen, when we leave, you'll do your duty. You'll return to the capital, sit in your rightful seat, and fulfill your role. It's that simple. Understood?" Song Jiatuan sneered. "And if I refuse?" The man smirked and said. "Because, dear nephew, I'm not just any man. I'm your uncle, and I'm the strongest warrior in the entire Li dynasty." Outside, thunder rumbled over the quiet town. From the house across, the sound of footsteps came through. Just as Lu Tiandong was about to jump down from the wall, he suddenly felt his body freeze. Before he could see anyone, he heard a gentle voice laughing and asking. "You, boy, are you the apprentice of Master Yao from Baoshi Kiln? Surname Lu." A man dressed in white robes, with a jade belt around his waist, stepped briskly out of the doorway, looking up at the wall with a smile. Lu Tiandong's body stiffened as he realized he had lost all strength to jump down. He forced a nervous laugh and replied. Replying to the official, "Yes, I am. Back when you visited our Long Yao kiln, my master asked me to present a few things to you. The man nodded, taking a moment to examine the tall young man before getting straight to the point. Young man, have you ever thought of going out to see the world? Perhaps joining the army, fighting on the battlefield? I guarantee that if you endure for just 10 years, you can become a high-ranking official. When that time comes, I will personally host a grand banquet for you in the capital. How about it? Behind the man, Tong Jitan's expression was dark as he clenched a jade pendant given to him by a Funan noble. Having carried the title of illegitimate son and bastard for many years, he now understood the true identity of the man beside him. That made him even more aware of the weight behind the man's words. Those 4 words, personally host a banquet, would be the strongest protective talisman in Dali's court, a stairway to the highest ranks of power. Lu Tiandong racked his brain for some refined words but ended up stammering. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your kindness. I'm overwhelmed, but I've already promised to become an apprentice at Blacksmith Master Nguyen's shop. It wouldn't be right to go back on my word. I hope Your Excellency can. Your Excellency, no matter what. The tall young man choked on his words, unable to continue, his face flushing red from anxiety. Tong Jitan, seemingly helpful, reminded him. Perhaps Your Excellency doesn't remember him. The white-robed man smiled, not taking offense. No worries. If one day you find a chance to leave this town, head to the nearest Danyang mountain pass and find a man named Lu Linchi. Tell him you were recommended by Song Chongjing from the capital to enlist. If he doesn't believe you, tell him Song Chongjing said he still owes him 30,000 to sway border cavalry heads. Lu Tiandong absent-mindedly nodded. All right. The man chuckled and walked away. Tong Jitan followed him to the courtyard gate but hesitated to go further. The man, having anticipated his reluctance, didn't turn around as he said plainly. Come with me to the Directorate of Armaments. I'll introduce you to someone. Tong Jitan planted his feet firmly, his face darkened. I'm not going. For the common folk of this town, that place was a high and unreachable threshold. But for a boy raised on rumors and slander, it was a tiger's den, an insurmountable barrier in his heart. The man, who usually acted swiftly and decisively, was not annoyed by the boy's stubbornness, nor did he stop walking. He only slowed his pace significantly. According to the Directorate spies, you've met that prince of the Sui dynasty, haven't you? Do you realize that the Sui royal family and our Dali Song family have been bitter enemies for 1,000 years? Both of you are princes, he dares to venture alone into the enemy's territory, yet you, Song Jitan, don't even have the courage to step into a mere government office within your own kingdom? Before digesting the full meaning of those words, Song Jitan instinctively turned to look at Lu Tiandong. The tall young man was still sitting on the wall, swinging his legs idly as if he had heard nothing. Walking down the familiar alleyway of Ni Ping, the white-robed prince of Dali smirked. Not bad. A true descendant of the Song family. But then, remembering that the boy was the son of that woman, the most powerful martial lord and imperial prince of Dali felt an unusual frustration. Song Jitan gritted his teeth and said to Ji Kuei, who stood by the door. I'll be back soon. No need to prepare lunch for me. Just as he stepped out of the courtyard, he turned back and added with a smile. Take the loose change from my bedside and go buy that pair of Dragon Phoenix incense pendants at the Do shop. We won't need to save money anymore. Ji Kuei nodded and gestured carefully in sign language. Song Jitan laughed and strode away. As he disappeared, Lu Tiandong cautiously asked. Ji Kuei, what exactly is the relationship between Song Jitan and that directorate official? Ji Kuei gave him a pitying look. Lu Tiandong hated that expression the most. What? Just because he knows some big shot, is that so impressive? Ji Kuei curled her lips, ignored him, and went back inside to feed the old hen and her fluffy chicks. Feeling oddly disappointed, Lu Tiandong jumped down from the wall and shouted. "Hey, Tran, let's go to the blacksmith shop. I'm not swallowing this humiliation." From the neighboring yard, a girl's teasing voice came. "A monk fights for incense, a man fights for pride. But a weakling? All he has is bottled up frustration." Lu Tiandong's face flushed with rage. He slammed his fist against the wall and shouted. "Wang Zhou! Say that again if you dare." The maid tossed aside her vegetables, clapped the dust off her hands, and turned around with a smirk. "You think you're someone special? Why should I repeat myself just because you asked?" Lu Tiandong stared at the feisty girl, feeling speechless. Something in his heart felt empty, like a porcelain bowl shattering on the ground. Tran Benin had been standing at the door for a while. Watching the scene unfold, he finally spoke softly. "Let's go." As they walked side by side down the alley, Lu Tiandong suddenly asked. "Tran Benin, do you think I'm a failure?" Tran Benin thought for a moment before answering seriously. "The neighbors always said my mother was a good woman, and my father was a well-known drunkard. So I think whether someone likes you or not doesn't really have much to do with your success." Lu Tiandong looked defeated. "Then I'm even more pathetic. Even if I build my own long kiln one day, or master everything from blacksmith master Nguyen, she still won't like me, will she?" Tran Benin wisely kept silent, not wanting to make things worse. As they neared the end of Ni Ping Alley, Lu Tiandong suddenly cursed under his breath. Tran Benin followed his gaze and felt a heavy weight settle in his heart. It was Lu Jingchun, the eldest son of the wealthy Lu family on Fu Lu Street. Years ago, he had led a gang of thugs to ambush Lu Tiandong in this very alley, nearly beating him to death. If Tran Benin hadn't called for help in time, Lu Tiandong, an orphan with no living relatives, might have been left to rot in a mass grave. Back then, Song Jitan had sat on the wall watching the fight like a spectator, even egging them on. Later, he had told Tran Benin that Lu Jingchuan's actions were called righteous brotherhood in the town's slang. Now, Lu Jingchun blocked their path again, smiling insincerely. "Relax. I'm not here to settle old scores. I just..." Lu Tiandong cut him off coldly. "Get lost." Lu Jingchuan's smile faltered, turning slightly embarrassed, but he forced himself to keep up the act. From the house across, the sound of footsteps came through. Just as Lu Tiandong was about to jump down from the wall, he suddenly felt his body freeze. Before he could see anyone, he heard a gentle voice laughing and asking. "You, boy, are you the apprentice of Master Yao from Baoshi Kiln? Surname Lu?" A man dressed in white robes, with a jade belt around his waist, stepped briskly out of the doorway, looking up at the wall with a smile. Lu Tiandong's body stiffened as he realized he had lost all strength to jump down. He forced a nervous laugh and replied. Replying to the official, "Yes, I am. Back when you visited our Long Yao kiln, my master asked me to present a few things to you." The man nodded, taking a moment to examine the tall young man before getting straight to the point. "Young man, have you ever thought of going out to see the world? Perhaps joining the army, fighting on the battlefield? I guarantee that if you endure for just 10 years, you can become a high-ranking official. When that time comes, I will personally host a grand banquet for you in the capital. How about it?" Behind the man, Tong Jitan's expression was dark as he clenched a jade pendant given to him by a Funan noble. Having carried the title of illegitimate son and bastard for many years, he now understood the true identity of the man beside him. That made him even more aware of the weight behind the man's words. Those 4 words, personally host a banquet, would be the strongest protective talisman in Dali's court, a stairway to the highest ranks of power. Lu Tiandong racked his brain for some refined words but ended up stammering. "Thank you, Your Excellency, for your kindness. I'm overwhelmed, but I've already promised to become an apprentice at blacksmith Master Nguyen's shop. It wouldn't be right to go back on my word." I hope your excellency can. Your excellency, no matter what. The tall young man choked on his words, unable to continue, his face flushing red from anxiety. Tong Jitan, seemingly helpful, reminded him. Perhaps your excellency doesn't remember him. The white-robed man smiled, not taking offense. No worries. If one day you find a chance to leave this town, head to the nearest Danyang mountain pass and find a man named Lu Linqi. Tell him you were recommended by Song Changjing from the capital to enlist. If he doesn't believe you, tell him Song Changjing said he still owes him 30,000 to sway border cavalry heads. Lu Tiandong absent-mindedly nodded. All right. The man chuckled and walked away. Tong Jitan followed him to the courtyard gate but hesitated to go further. The man, having anticipated his reluctance, didn't turn around as he said plainly. Come with me to the Directorate of Armaments. I'll introduce you to someone. Tong Jitan planted his feet firmly, his face darkened. I'm not going. For the common folk of this town, that place was a high and unreachable threshold. But for a boy raised on rumors and slander, it was a tiger's den, an insurmountable barrier in his heart. The man, who usually acted swiftly and decisively, was not annoyed by the boy's stubbornness, nor did he stop walking. He only slowed his pace significantly. According to the Directorate spies, you've met that prince of the Sui dynasty, haven't you? Do you realize that the Sui royal family and our Li Song family have been bitter enemies for 1,000 years? Both of you are princes, he dares to venture alone into the enemy's territory, yet you, Song Jitan, don't even have the courage to step into a mere government office within your own kingdom? Before digesting the full meaning of those words, Song Jitan instinctively turned to look at Lu Tiandong. The tall young man was still sitting on the wall, swinging his legs idly as if he had heard nothing. Walking down the familiar alleyway of Ni Ping, the white-robed prince of Dali smirked. Not bad. A true descendant of the Song family. But then, remembering that the boy was the son of that woman, the most powerful martial lord and imperial prince of Dali felt an unusual frustration. Song Jitan gritted his teeth and said to Ji Kuei, who stood by the door. I'll be back soon. No need to prepare lunch for me. Just as he stepped out of the courtyard, he turned back and added with a smile. Take the loose change from my bedside and go buy that pair of Dragon Phoenix incense pendants at the do shop. We won't need to save money anymore. Ji Kuei nodded and gestured carefully in sign language. Song Jitan laughed and strode away. As he disappeared, Lu Tiandong cautiously asked. Ji Kuei, what exactly is the relationship between Song Jitan and that directorate official? Ji Kuei gave him a pitying look. Lu Tiandong hated that expression the most. What? Just because he knows some big shot, is that so impressive? Ji Kuei curled her lips, ignored him, and went back inside to feed the old hen and her fluffy chicks. Feeling oddly disappointed, Lu Tiandong jumped down from the wall and shouted. Hey, Tran, let's go to the blacksmith shop. I'm not swallowing this humiliation. From the neighboring yard, a girl's teasing voice came. A monk fights for incense, a man fights for pride. But a weakling? All he has is bottled up frustration. Lu Tiandong's face flushed with rage. He slammed his fist against the wall and shouted. Wang Zhou. Say that again if you dare. The maid tossed aside her vegetables, clapped the dust off her hands, and turned around with a smirk. You think you're someone special? Why should I repeat myself just because you asked? Lu Tiandong stared at the feisty girl, feeling speechless. Something in his heart felt empty, like a porcelain bowl shattering on the ground. Tran Benin had been standing at the door for a while. Watching the scene unfold, he finally spoke softly. Let's go. As they walked side by side down the alley, Lu Tiandong suddenly asked. Tran Benin, do you think I'm a failure? Tran Benin thought for a moment before answering seriously. The neighbors always said my mother was a good woman, and my father was a well-known drunkard. So I think whether someone likes you or not doesn't really have much to do with your success." Lu Tiandong looked defeated. "Then I'm even more pathetic. Even if I build my own long kiln one day, or master everything from blacksmith mastering Nguyen, she still won't like me, will she?" Tran Ben wisely kept silent, not wanting to make things worse. As they neared the end of Ni Ping Alley, Lu Tiandong suddenly cursed under his breath. Tran Ben followed his gaze and felt a heavy weight settle in his heart. It was Lu Jingchun, the eldest son of the wealthy Lu family on Fu Lu Street. Years ago, he had led a gang of thugs to ambush Lu Tiandong in this very alley, nearly beating him to death. If Tran Ben hadn't called for help in time, Lu Tiandong, an orphan with no living relatives, might have been left to rot in a mass grave. Back then, Song Jitan had sat on the wall watching the fight like a spectator, even egging them on. Later, he had told Tran Ben that Lu Jingchuan's actions were called righteous brotherhood in the town's slang. Now, Lu Jingchun blocked their path again, smiling insincerely. "Relax. I'm not here to settle old scores. I just..." Lu Tiandong cut him off coldly. "Get lost." Lu Jingchuan's smile faltered, turning slightly embarrassed, but he forced himself to keep up the act. After leaving Muddy Alley, Lu Xianyang and Chen Ping'an noticed two distinct groups of people standing on opposite sides of the street. A little girl sat atop the broad shoulders of a muscular old man, while a young boy in a bright red robe stood confidently beside a graceful woman. As Lu Xianyang passed between the two groups, his relaxed demeanor earned him an approving nod from the white-haired elder. In contrast, Chen Ping'an, despite his best efforts to hide his unease, barely warranted a second glance. After bidding farewell to the two boys, Lu Jingchun, clearly nervous, carefully reported to the white-haired elder. "Lu Xianyang suggests that you, esteemed immortals, set a fair price. Next time, he will endure the pain of parting with his treasured heirlooms for this deal." The graceful woman turned to the elder from Jinyang Mountain and smiled. "Senior Yuan, what are your thoughts?" The old man considered for a moment before speaking in a low, steady voice. 3 times is the limit. This time, we will follow Lu Xianyang's suggestion. We shall grant him boundless wealth, Jinyang Mountain will accept him as a direct disciple. Furthermore, I will personally lend him a treasured artifact for 100 years. The woman's eyes widened in shock. A direct disciple of Jinyang Mountain is already an honor beyond measure, but you would also grant him a magical artifact? Don't tell me this Lu boy is some hidden cultivation genius who escaped the immortal sex at the age of 9. The old man remained silent, simply smiling as he turned to the little girl riding on his shoulders. There are many shops in town with deep histories, young Mississippi. You may wander and explore, you might just stumble upon a hidden treasure. The little girl squealed excitedly, pulling at the old man's hair like she was riding a horse. Giddy up! Giddy up! The elder of Jinyang Mountain laughed heartily and strode forward like a moving mountain. Behind them, the boy in the red robe smirked. Jinyang Mountain certainly knows how to throw its weight around. The graceful woman gestured for Lu Jingchun to leave first, then strolled down the street with her son, explaining. Jinyang Mountain has more than just its main mountain path for ascension. There are also 6 sword paths leading to its peak. This means that 6 true sword immortals have ascended from its ranks. The boy scoffed. What's the use of ancient history? Can past glories sustain a sect for 100 years? All these so-called powerful figures crowding into this town, every single one of them comes from a great lineage. The woman smiled and asked, then, do you know that in the past 100 years, 2 new sword paths are about to be carved into Jinyang Mountain? She glanced at him meaningfully before adding. That little girl who kept arguing with you. She's incredibly gifted. In fact, she can already walk freely atop the sword peak of Jinyang Mountain, something even some elders of the sect struggle to do. The boy froze, then stomped his foot angrily. If she's that talented, why didn't you tell me earlier? I wouldn't have antagonized her. If I marry her in a few years and form a Dao companion bond, wouldn't that be an enormous advantage for Qingfeng City? The woman chuckled at her son's indignant expression. You and that girl both have the potential to reach the upper 5 realms in cultivation. That means your fates will be even more complicated. If you act rashly, it will only make things worse. Do you really think that right now, that girl only hates you? The boy frowned. What else could it be? The woman patted his hand gently. Just let things happen naturally. The boy suddenly turned serious. Mother, I don't like that boy who followed behind Lu Xianyang. The moment I saw him, I disliked him. The woman raised an eyebrow. Oh. Why is that? The boy thought for a moment before replying. He's strange. He's nothing like the cunning Lu Jingchun, but he's also completely different from that clueless fool Lu Xianyang. And most of all, I hate his eyes. The woman dismissed it as childish stubbornness, gently reassuring him. This town won't last forever, but if knowing that eases your heart, then so be it. The boy nodded, then muttered under his breath. Ants. The Lang Bridge. Outside town, Chen Pingyan and Lu Xianyang soon arrived at Lang Bridge. As they climbed the steps, Lu Xianyang casually asked. Why do you think Song Jiatuan's father built this bridge? Why bother covering the old stone arch bridge instead of demolishing it? It's like dressing up an old man in a new robe. Wouldn't that make him sweat in the summer? Laughing at his own joke, Lu Xianyang stomped heavily on the stone steps. He then leaned in and whispered, Old man Jia told me something strange. When this bridge was being built, one night, Song Jiatuan's father had people dig a massive hole beneath it and buried a giant black urn inside. You scared yet? Chen Pingyan rolled his eyes. What's there to be scared of? Inside the shady bridge, Lu Xianyang dropped his voice even lower. Could it be that since the deep pool below has drowned so many people, they needed a way to suppress the restless spirits? Chen Pingyan, ever the practical one, remained silent. Losing interest, Lu Xianyang stretched out on one of the stone steps, gazing at the sky. Hey, if it weren't for me, do you think you and Song Jiatuan would have become friends? Chen Pingyan shook his head. Maybe we'd be on better terms, but not exactly friends. Lu Xianyang turned to him. Why not? You're neighbors, the same age. Sure, Song Jiatuan can be arrogant, but he's never really done anything horrible. Chen Pingyan simply laughed. Let's not worry about that. We should get going. If you want to keep your treasured armor, you'd better impress Master Nguyen today. Lu Xianyang groaned. Alright. But seriously, Chen Pingyan, you really talk too much sometimes. If you don't fix that habit, you'll annoy people to death one day. With a grin, Lu Xianyang reclined against the steps. Hey, when you followed old man Zhu up the mountains, what was the most amazing thing you saw? Chen Pingyan chewed on a blade of licorice grass and mumbled, the farthest we ever went was a week-long trip. We crossed over 10 peaks before reaching this one mountain that was ridiculously high. By the time we got halfway up, all we could see was clouds. Lu Xianyang, impatient, interrupted. And? What did you see at the top? Chen Pingyan hesitated, then said softly, a taller mountain. Lu Xianyang snapped upright. That's it? You made me wait for that. I thought you saw some flying immortal. Chen Pingyan grinned. Who's to say there aren't immortals living on that mountain? Lu Xianyang laughed. Hey, if immortals exist, do you think they still have to eat and, use the toilet? Chen Pingyan rubbed his chin. If they do, that's kind of weird. With a mischievous grin, Lu Xianyang slapped the back of Chen Pingyan's head and bolted. If immortals exist, I hope they poop right on your head. Ning Yao furrowed her brows and reached out to grab the ancient book in Chen Pingyan's hands. But to her surprise, Chen Pingyan pulled back slightly, moving the book out of her reach. At that moment, Ning Yao's entire body stiffened. Her anger surged. She had never been humiliated like this before. She was Ning Yao, her parents were sword immortals of the 12th realm. Since birth, she had been hailed as a peerless sword prodigy. Even though she had run away from home for years, the only defeats she had ever suffered were in sword duels or cultivation battles. Never had anyone insulted her character in this way. What was this? A worn-out book, and he thought she would stoop so low as to steal a glance. Did he think she was so desperate that she had to secretly covet something that belonged to him? Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her saber. Her sharp, narrow eyes glinted with cold light. She was angry. But before she could lash out, Chen Pingyan spoke, his next words carrying an unexpected weight, a simple logic that was both naive and strangely unshakable. Miss Ning, this book belonged to Chao Shan's family. While I don't think I stole it, I do intend to return it to him someday. But we're friends, so no matter what's written in this book, I'd prefer that you keep it to yourself. For a moment, Ning Yao was completely dumbfounded. Then, her fury nearly made her cough up blood. What are you looking at? Just read it yourself. I don't want it. She slammed the table in frustration. But Chen Pingyan, ever oblivious, continued in a serious tone. Miss Ning, I don't recognize many words. Can you teach me? A thought crossed Ning Yao's mind. She sneered. Aren't you afraid I'll cheat you? Think about it, Chao Shan is a natural-born martial prodigy, even more talented than Lu Xianyang. In the past 1,000 years, few in this town could compare to him. If even he treasured this book so carefully, can it really be ordinary? What if I just take it for myself? Under the dim glow of the oil lamp, Chen Pingyan smiled faintly, saying nothing. Ning Yao scoffed, then moved aside, patting the seat beside her. Sit here, she said. But Chen Pingyan hesitated for a long moment, unwilling to move closer. Finally, Ning Yao couldn't take it anymore and burst into laughter. What? Are you afraid I'll take advantage of you? With a sigh, Chen Pingyan finally sat down beside her, his posture stiff and nervous. But Ning Yao, still caught up in her earlier frustration, was lost in her own thoughts, muttering to herself. One palm can flatten 100 Chen Pingyans. This phrase is quite useful. If I ever duel someone and they lose, I can mock them by saying, you only have the strength of 3,000 Chen Pingyans, yet you dare challenge me? Or, if I ever run into some terrifying ancient beast or a great demon, I can remind myself, this monster is as strong as 30,000 Chen Pingyans. I should run. Ha! Not bad, not bad. Sitting beside her, Chen Pingyan was completely baffled. Why was she suddenly laughing to herself? But when Ning Yao smiled, it felt like the entire house lit up. For a moment, Chen Pingyan felt oddly rich, as if he was not just a poor boy in Muddy Alley, but someone truly wealthy. Neither of them realized that the phrase, one palm can flatten 100 Chen Pingyans, would one day carry immeasurable weight in the long years ahead. Especially when the boy in straw sandals was no longer a mere boy. The hidden martial manual. When Ning Yao finally regained her composure, she coughed lightly and straightened her back. She took the book, flipping through a few pages quickly before closing it again. With one finger, she tapped the cover and calmly stated. This is a fist technique manual. The style is called Mountain Seeker. If you follow martial traditions, you could also call it, the Mountain Seeker's Manual. Chen Pingyan's eyes lit up. And then? Ning Yao fought the urge to roll her eyes. Suppressing her impatience, she slowly opened the book and pointed to the introduction. Her delicate fingers traced the characters as she read aloud. There is a small insect called the mountain ant that spends its entire life carrying stones into the water. My fist technique does not distinguish between life and death, only between survival and destruction. It values intent over form, and its 6 moves, when mastered, are devastating. A single strike can injure a person's internal organs beyond recovery. Though the Mountain Seeker's Manual has never been recognized among the elite martial arts of its time, I firmly believe that, among all the fist techniques under the heavens, it deserves a place. I hope that someone, someday, will carry it forward. With a swift cadence, Ning Yao read through the entire preface for Chen Pingyan. Though the manual itself was thin, its introduction was surprisingly long-winded. When she finished, Ning Yao shoved the book toward Chen Pingyan, then patted his shoulder dismissively. "Keep it safe. Don't let it get stolen." Chen Pingyan nodded seriously, carefully cupping the manual with both hands. Ning Yao found this utterly hilarious. "What, do you think the book will grow legs and run away?" Still, Chen Pingyan, ever cautious, wiped his hands on his clothes before opening the book. The introduction was easy enough to understand, but when he reached the actual techniques, the words and illustrations became as cryptic as an ancient riddle. Ning Yao leaned against the table, resting her elbow on the surface as she observed Chen Pingyan's expression. "What? Feeling like you struck gold? Think you'll be chopping firewood with a golden axe and eating from a jade bowl soon?" Still focused on the book, Chen Pingyan replied absently. "Actually, when I saw your expression earlier, I already knew this manual wouldn't be anything amazing. But that doesn't matter, it's already good enough for me." Ning Yao raised an eyebrow and said bluntly. "I've seen and heard of many powerful techniques. I can tell the difference between good and bad martial arts. But knowing whether something is good or bad is very different from knowing how good or bad it really is." Chen Pingyan looked up. "So this manual is good but not great?" Ning Yao snapped, "I don't even know how to describe how useless this fist technique is." Chen Pingyan simply grinned. He had already expected as much. Ning Yao squinted at him, then unsheathed her saber just a fraction, threatening. "Want to be cut?" Chen Pingyan glanced at the green-sheathed saber at her waist and sighed in admiration. "It's beautiful." Ning Yao smirked proudly. "Of course. I, Ning Yao, only pick the best blades." Chen Pingyan looked at her again. She was so confident, as if no challenge could shake her, as if she would rise like the sun, unstoppable. He sighed. If only sunlight could be exchanged for money. Ning Yao blinked. "What?" Then, her expression darkened. "Chen Pingyan, have you gone money crazy?" Realizing he had spoken his thoughts out loud, Chen Pingyan quickly changed the subject. "Miss Ning, can you help me read this first page?" Ning Yao clenched her fists, her face darkening further. Scram! Tran Benan wore a skeptical expression, while Nin Ju glared at him, pointing at the line of text. "It really reads, roll." This technique of understanding characters aligns with the martial arts of Dai Li, where the force of a punch rolls forward. The technique is fierce like ink strokes splattering in a torrential downpour. Once it falls upon the world, it rolls forward, just like the dragon walls of Dai Li's imperial palace collapsing straight down. Tran Benan focused intently on the continuous and fluid depictions of martial techniques, arranged neatly on a single sheet, resembling a military formation. Each little figure demonstrating the fist technique was small, and the charcoal strokes of the artist were not particularly detailed. However, Tran Benan's sharp eyesight allowed him to catch every minute detail even under the dim oil lamp. Hearing Nin's words, which he barely understood, he murmured, "It sounds like a very powerful martial technique." Nin Ju leaned forward slightly, studying the practice sketches before nodding. "There is one particular fist technique that has been passed down for thousands of years in the martial world without being lost. It bears some similarities to this martial manual." Tran Benan turned his head curiously. "What do you mean?" Under the faint glow of the oil lamp, the young girl's long eyebrows arched slightly, like a spring breeze bending a branch of peach blossoms. Trying to hold back a laugh, she said, "There's a certain fist technique in the martial world, known as the turtle-8 fist. It's a reckless and chaotic style, said to be capable of beating a master to death with sheer wild punches. Tran Benon sighed helplessly, that can't be right. Imagining the technique in his mind, he thought, wasn't this exactly the signature move and renowned skill of Ko-san? In his memories, years ago, Ko-san's mother had once faced an unpleasant dispute in front of a cosmetic shop in Han Hoa Alley. At that time, Ko-san was still just learning to walk, and his father, an outsider who rarely returned home, had long since been forgotten by the neighbors of Naben Alley. Back then, the neighborhood women had begun to worry. Whenever their men passed by the widow Ko's house, their footsteps seemed to slow as if they were being bewitched. Eventually, an old woman named Baba Ma gathered 5 or 6 women to storm Ko's courtyard. Ko suffered greatly in the scuffle, but neither side gained much advantage. However, as time passed, she found herself alone, outnumbered, and overpowered. Her clothes were torn to shreds, and being dressed lightly, she was unable to avoid an embarrassing exposure. This only fueled the rage of the so-called righteous women, who resorted to scratching, biting, and tearing with no regard, much to the hushed, eager interest of the men watching from the alleys. Luckily, at that time, Tran Benon had just returned to the small town from Longdu. Having been cared for by Ko for many years, he stepped in to protect her from many vicious blows. From start to finish, the straw-sandaled boy dared not fight back, not because he feared trouble, but because he was afraid that one punch of his might kill someone. Back then, amidst Jiu Lao Dao's angry shouts and curses, the young boy had already traversed countless mountains and rivers. At the age of 12 or 13, he had walked farther than most elders in the small town had in their entire lives. That day, the boy and the woman sat by the entrance of the courtyard. Ko-san had been locked inside, perhaps because she didn't want her son to witness her in such a miserable state. The boy turned his head and pointed at the corner of her lips. The woman pursed her lips casually, then wiped the blood away with her thumb. Inside the courtyard, the child wailed heart-wrenchingly, calling for his mother again and again. First, the woman smiled at the straw-sandaled boy. Then, with a sudden tremble, tears welled up in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. The next day, a reluctant shadow began following the straw-sandaled boy wherever he went. Ninja's voice interrupted Tran Benon's deep thoughts. What are you thinking about? Tran Benon asked, do you think Ko-san and his mother will truly have a better life after leaving this small town and following Tikjong Chan Quan to Thursday Jonho? Ninju asked in return, do you think their life in Naben Alley was good? Tran Benon thought for a moment, that little brat Ko-san, without much sense of gratitude, probably didn't find life too difficult. But as for his mother, she likely never felt that the town was a good place, especially the women of Naben Alley and Han Hoa Alley. She didn't like any of them. Besides, I feel like she was never meant to stay in this town. She always seemed unwilling, as if she wasn't satisfied. According to Jiu Lao Dao, when a man has an unsettled heart, it's called ambition. When a woman has an unsettled heart, it's called disloyalty. But I don't think that saying is quite right. Suddenly, Ninju straightened up, slammed the table, and snapped, enough with your rambling. Do you want to learn the martial manual or not? Tran Benon was startled. Alright, Nin Ko Nuang, please continue. Ninju huffed, talking to you about cultivation is pointless since you are destined to be unable to practice it. So, I can only talk to you about martial arts. Just as Tran Benon was about to say something, the girl continued, the martial path consists of 9 realms. Of course, some say that beyond the 9th realm, there is a 10th, a realm akin to the privileged elite of the imperial courts. At this, her mood suddenly improved, and she grinned mischievously. Tran Benon, do you know what a special rank is? Tran Benon, ever honest, shook his head. Her eyes sparkled. In the world of Go, the highest rank is the 9th Dan, like a top-ranked official. But once in a century, there might be a prodigy recognized as a 10th Dan National Master, with a special title. Your Dai Li Kingdom's Go players are embarrassingly weak, barely on par with the 7th Dan players of the Tui dynasty. The only exception is a guy nicknamed Tu Ho, the only one taken seriously by the Go community in Tui. Oh, by the way, do you even know what Go is? Tran Benin nodded. I know. I understand the rules a little, but I don't know how to play. Tong Tap Tan and Tri QS families have a Go board. The girl seemed disappointed. I see. She continued her explanation of the martial path, but Tran Benin, despite listening attentively, barely understood. Chen Pingyang had planned that if he ever searched for stones during the day, he would start from Lu Xianyang's place and slowly work his way upstream until he reached Lang Bridge. That was why, tonight, he deliberately chose a starting point further upstream, away from Lang Bridge and the blue-green cliff where he had first seen the girl in green. Because of this, he unknowingly missed the encounter between Song Tap Tan and the Kiln Overseer. Lang Bridge and the offering of incense. At Lang Bridge, the large golden plaque hung high, bearing the 4 characters. Calling the wind and rain. The white-robed man with a jade belt, officially the Kiln Overseer, was in reality none other than Great Li's most powerful vassal prince. Under his guidance, Song Tap Tan arrived at the bottom of the bridge steps, dressed neatly after bathing and changing at the government office. He now wore a fragrant sachet at his waist along with an ordinary dragon-shaped jade pendant, its color dull and unremarkable. The superior old dragon brocade jade pendant, however, had been forcefully removed by the prince, strictly forbidden to be worn. Holding 3 sticks of incense, Song Tap Tan stood at the base of the steps, uncertain of what to do. The vassal prince, Song Changjing, turned, extended 2 fingers, and lightly rubbed the incense tips. A small flame flickered into life. He spoke casually. After kneeling, face the plaque, bow 3 times until your forehead strikes the ground, then plant the incense sticks into the soil. That's it. Though full of doubts, Song Tap Tan followed his so-called uncle's instructions. After he knelt, the prince's expression changed, becoming solemn and deeply complex. His gaze fell upon the spot where Song Tap Tan's forehead touched the ground, and beneath that calm exterior lay a hatred buried deep. When Song Tap Tan finished the ritual and stood, he asked, "Is it all right to offer incense here?" The prince laughed. "It's just a formality, don't dwell on it. From this moment on, learn to go with the flow. Otherwise, in the future, you might find yourself in serious trouble." Then, his expression hardened. "But don't forget, this Lang Bridge is your place of imperial fortune." Song Tap Tan's lips curled in mockery. Those 4 words, imperial fortune, shouldn't be thrown around so lightly. The prince slapped his stomach and chuckled. In the capital, sure, I'd watch my words. But here? Who cares? I'm neither a hound guarding the temple nor a stray dog of the martial world. No one dares to bite me. Song Tap Tan was curious. So even you fear criticism? The prince countered, "I have crushed every opponent, on and off the battlefield. If I had no fears at all, wouldn't I be more comfortable than the man sitting on the imperial throne? Tell me, does that sound reasonable to you?" After some thought, Song Tap Tan hesitated before asking, "Are you hiding your strength? Or biding your time?" The prince burst into laughter, pointing at Song Tap Tan. "You sure dare to speak recklessly. If you don't learn restraint in the capital or some mountain sanctuary, you'll get yourself killed." Song Tap Tan nodded. "I'll remember that." The prince pointed at the golden plaque. "Calling the wind and rain. Now tell me, how does one summon the water?" Without hesitation, Song Tap Tan replied, "I don't know." The prince muttered, "To know what you know and admit what you don't, what a load of nonsense. Scholars love to twist their words into endless loops." Then he smirked. "If I recall correctly, for the past 3,000 years, no matter how severe the floods were, the highest water level of this stream never rose above the tip of the rusty sword beneath the bridge." Song Tap Tan frowned. "The old man living near the Iron Lock well always says that under the pagoda tree. Is there really something behind it?" The prince pointed toward the distant mountains where the river emerged. Among the forests, snakes have their paths. Within houses, rats have their tunnels. And in rivers, dragons have their ways. Retracting his hand, he explained. Throughout greatly in many other lands, people have the custom of hanging swords under bridges. But most of those swords, be they copper coins strung together, wooden peach swords, or talisman swords, are weak. They might stop a river dragon from passing once, but not twice. If the one who hangs the sword is weak, the flood simply washes the bridge and sword away. He paused and sighed, but this particular sword. Halfway through, he fell silent. Song Tap Tan did not press for an answer. The prince exhaled deeply. This particular sword was not placed to ward off any ordinary river dragon. It was placed by a sage to suppress the exit of the dragon sealing well, preventing the dragon's aura from escaping too quickly and shattering this entire world. A piercing question left Song Tap Tan's lips. Did the last true dragon really die? The prince chuckled. 3,000 years ago, in the dragon-slaying battle, countless cultivators perished, including sages and grandmasters of the 100 schools. Do you think they were all fools? Do you think sages, with their centuries of wisdom, just played around, leaving one dragon alive as some pet? Song Tap Tan argued, maybe they couldn't kill it completely. Maybe they had to use a slow, methodical approach instead. The prince thought for a moment and then nodded. You're half right. The dragon is dead, no doubt about that. But its identity and significance? Not simple, doesn't even begin to describe it. Song Tap Tan remained silent. The prince continued, all the schemes of greatly, all the efforts over centuries, were for one thing, stirring the wind and waters, preparing for our empire's southern conquest. Climbing the steps, he added, if you ask why the sages slew the dragon, I can't answer you. But if you ask why you were left in this town, why you're a noble prince of greatly, I can tell you everything. Song Tap Tan kept his head low. His expression was unreadable. He didn't ask. And so the prince didn't offer an answer. As the prince reached the top step, he turned toward the town. In the future, be more ambitious. If you want to compete with Lu Xianyang or even kill him, don't you find that beneath you? Instead of answering, Song Tap Tan asked something completely unrelated. Is greatly located at the northernmost part of eastern Baoping continent? The prince nodded, yes, and for nearly 1,000 years, we've been called northern barbarians. Only recently, by strength, have we won respect. Song Tap Tan remained looking northward, his eyes burning with intensity. The prince smirked, when you reach the capital, be wary of someone called, Cultured Tiger. Song Tap Tan frowned. The prince explained, he's now the national teacher of Greatly, and also your younger brother's mentor. Half of our empire's territorial expansion in the past 50 years is thanks to him. For the first time, Song Tap Tan snapped his gaze upward, staring at the prince in shock. The prince chuckled, yes, you guessed it right. Both of them sat on the steps, looking at the vast world before them. Song Tap Tan trembled slightly. Tonight, the world had changed. Tran Ben carried the basket on his back after reaching the shore and walked toward Ton Go Boy. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but he felt that the water level in the small stream had dropped slightly. As he approached the blue-green rocky slope, he suddenly stopped in his tracks because he clearly saw quite a few people standing there. Each person's features were almost entirely visible, not because of any dazzling light but because a pure white deer stood atop Ton Go Boy. Its entire body was translucent, radiating a gentle white glow, shimmering like ripples over the water plants in the stream. The white deer lowered its head while a little girl in a crimson cotton coat stood on her tiptoes, stretching her hand out to stroke its antlers. Nearby were two young men and women dressed in Taoist robes. Perhaps due to the radiance of the white deer, their skin appeared to be as white as snow, glowing with a jade-like translucence. In stark contrast to the common folk of the small town, who were like rough clay molded from the earth, these two Taoist cultivators seemed like exquisitely crafted porcelain, as if they belonged to an entirely different world. Their Taoist robes were similar in style to those of Lu the fortune-teller from the market stall, but there were many subtle differences. The most striking distinction was their headgear. While Lu Daozhang wore a lotus crown, the two of them wore crowns shaped like fish tails. The straw-sandaled youth stared in a daze, feeling as though the man and woman standing beside the white deer were celestial beings who had stepped out of a painting, ready to ascend into the heavens at any moment, plucking the stars and grasping the moon with ease. A little further away stood two more people. Tran Benan recognized one of them. It was the daughter of Master Nguyen, the swordsmith. This time, the young girl in green was not carrying a food-filled bundle but instead held a small embroidered handkerchief with a few delicate pastries on it. She lowered her head, looking hesitant, as if unsure which one to eat first. Beside her was a man who appeared to be in his early 30s, carrying a long sword on his back along with an unusual pendant. As soon as Tran Benan noticed them, it seemed they also sensed his sudden presence. The young Taoist woman was slightly surprised. She bent down to pat the little girl in the red cotton coat on the head, gesturing in Tran Benan's direction while whispering softly. The little girl perked up her ears, listening intently to the celestial sister speaking to her. When she recognized Tran Benan's appearance, she excitedly turned back, seemingly explaining his identity to the white deer's master. At that moment, Tran Benan also recognized the little girl, who appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old. He had first encountered her before heading to Long Ju Kiln, when she had been running through Naben Alley with a goat horn braid, holding a kite in her hands. Her legs were as thin as 2 bamboo sticks, yet she ran like the wind, leaving a deep impression on him. Later, he had seen her a few more times. Once, she had been leaning over the iron chain well, tossing stones into it, and when Tran Benan caught her in the act, she had fled in terror. But then she remembered that she had left her candied hawthorn skewers by the well, so she rushed back to grab them. In her haste, she tripped and fell flat on her face. When she stood up, she yanked out a loose tooth, stuffed it into her pocket without a word, and ran off again. That scene had left Tran Benan drenched in a cold sweat. The last time he had seen her was in the overgrown ruins of a temple during an autumn evening the previous year. He had returned from Longju to the small town, wandering around aimlessly, when he spotted her enthusiastically catching crickets, rolling in the grass and jumping about wildly. Upon seeing him, she had obviously recognized him too, then, like a gust of wind, she had disappeared again. Later, Ko-san had told him that this dirty little girl, despite looking like a wild child without supervision, was actually from the Lai family on Futlock Street, and not a servant or maid, but a legitimate member of the family. However, for some reason, she preferred to wander around alone, and her family did not seem to mind. Ko-san had spoken of her with both pride and disdain, boasting that despite her speed, she was hopelessly clumsy. He recalled how the two of them had once gone fishing in the stream together, but after an entire afternoon, she had only managed to catch a single crab. And the only reason she had even caught that was because the crab had clamped onto her finger. Ko-san had laughed so hard while retelling the story that he had rolled around on the wooden bed in Tran Benan's room, imitating her proudly showing off the crab as if it were a great achievement, even though she had been on the verge of tears from the pain. The handsome young Taoist glanced at the white deer and then at the female Taoist beside him, smiling as he said, "Senior sister Ha, you should be more careful. Don't spoil it too much. It's just an illusion that will last less than a week, it won't affect its freedom. Yet you insist on indulging it. What if it happens to encounter a mortal by chance? What then?" The stunningly beautiful female Taoist, after listening to the little girl's introduction, simply smiled and said, "Let things take their natural course." The young Taoist frowned slightly and took another careful look at Tran Benan. After scrutinizing him for a while, he still saw no remarkable qualities. Their sect was highly skilled in the art of physiognomy and geomancy, not the best in the continent, but certainly among the top practitioners. Since he had been entrusted with retrieving an important artifact and safely delivering it back to the sect, and eventually to the upper sects, he was clearly not an ordinary figure. However, after examining the straw-sandaled youth, he saw no extraordinary aura. If he, an expert in reading fortunes, could not discern anything special, then this boy was unlikely to be worth recruiting into their sect. The sect he and senior sister Ha belonged to was one of the three great Taoist sects of Dong Bao Ben Chao, the most prestigious Taoist sect in the entire region. This time, both of them had left the mountain with an extremely rare privilege. Each of them was allowed to choose a personal disciple for the sect, a future inheritor of the Tao. He did not intend to waste this opportunity. Meanwhile, senior sister Ha, known for her deep cultivation and her ability to perceive fate, had simply said, "Let things take their natural course." This statement might very well indicate she was considering taking on a disciple. Within Dong Bao Ben Chao, they were renowned as the Golden Boy and Jade Maiden of Taoism, the brightest prodigies with the highest potential to ascend beyond the mortal realm. Even mortal kings treated them with utmost respect. Because among all the Taoist cultivators of the region, they had the greatest chance of reaching the fabled fifth realm of cultivation.